personal views and opinions expressed by our podcast guests are their own and are not legal advice or official statements by their organizations. Hello, my name is Debbie Reynolds, and this is the Data Diva Talk Privacy Podcast, where we discuss data privacy issues with industry leaders around the world with information that businesses need to know right now. So today I have a very special guest from Canada, of all places, Dr. Edward C. He is the founder and CEO of AI Parenting, and he says he is involved in parenting in a world of AI, which I totally love the way he puts that. Also, he says he wants to transform screen time for educators, parents, and learners from sedation to relation and ultimately creation. That's very hip-hoppy. That's
Rhymes.
So why don't you tell me, my introduction of you doesn't do you justice in terms of your skills, abilities, and all the things that you're interested in. So tell us how you came to be Dr. C.
Sure. Thanks, first of all, Debbie, for having me on your show on the podcast. And I'm excited about this program, and I think you're doing some very important work in this space. A little bit about myself. My background is computer science, but even before that, it's always been creativity. It was around grade 7 that my French language arts teacher caught me cheating, and instead of punishing me, he decided, hey, he's kind of creative. We'll give him some opportunities to be creative. And everything since then has been about creativity and promoting that. And so we often say, don't sedate. There's so much sedation now due to AI technologies, such as YouTube and YouTube Kids. And we're trying to move from that screen time to quality time. And really, to do that, we need to move to connecting more, and we need to move to creating more. And so that's kind of some of the main messaging behind this. But I also serve as a privacy officer for an educational company called Nuitech. They make a software called Snowflake. And we recently, it's interesting, I kind of just moved into the privacy role because they needed somebody. But really, it's been such an interesting space right now, learning about the privacy side. And we just recently got news back from a third-party rating organization called Education Framework that our privacy rating is now 4.5 out of 5, which is really it's really high, even compared to others in our industry. And a lot of that has to do with looking at the legal implications, looking at what data that we do need to track, that's essential for the service. And I've learned a lot in that process.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, tell me how, I guess I want to figure out how you formed your interests in education as it relates to, parents and children and AI. So how did that come to be?
It's interesting. When I initially did my PhD work, I did it on the use of voice commands and gestures. And this is 2006. That was my PhD topic. It was very interesting. I asked, what was it? At my supervisor at the time, hey, could I work on video games? And she said, no, you can't. And so I came in on the weekends and I built this thing, which was a voice and gesture control over Google Earth and Warcraft. And I did it over the weekend and showed it. And she's like, wow, this is really good stuff. And then it ended up becoming the topic of my PhD. And from there, I always thought we did demonstrations for the New York Police Department. We did demonstrations for I always thought it would be a military background. But there's a company in Calgary that pursued me. I think it was Smart Technologies. And they were trying to build something new. And I was involved with the creation of the first digital, let's call it multi-touch table product for education. And so we launched this product with them, and I've been kind of in the education space since. And so before, it used to be a lot of, I always thought we're going to build this amazing technology and we're going to change education. But it kind of took me, 10 plus years to realize that no, technology doesn't change people. People change people. And so my focus has been on people, and being on a show like this one, the podcast, has been very encouraging because it's a way of connecting and doing change from within.
Yeah. I love that you say people change as people. I like technology, and my interests in privacy and my interest in technology have combined. So I really am excited to talk about anything that connects those two together. But I think where people go wrong, and this is, for me, when I look at movies, is all this dystopian future stuff, which is situations where humans allow technology to overtake them, or they defer, or they abdicate their responsibility to technology. So I love that you say humans change humans, and technology doesn't change humans, except this is an interesting thing. So before GPS, I used to read maps. I like maps, right? But now that people have GPS, they don't know how to get around without GPS. And it's like, oh my goodness, this is ridiculous. So in some ways, I feel like technology can change people in bad ways, where I think I should know how to get around without a GPS. What do you think?
I think your GPS analogy is really relevant for today, because so much of the technologies that we use, we have no idea how they actually work underneath. And this is the key for me, has been like equity, and even like this giant digital divide that we have, is achieving any type of equity or fighting back, or, creating a movement. I often say creativity isn't just like drawing pretty pictures. Like ultimately creativity needs an audience. And if you have an audience, eventually you can get a community that can follow you. And if you get communities to follow you, then you eventually have a movement. And so really it's about disrupting the status quo. And in order to do something like that, you need to know some basic things about the tools that are being used. So yes, in a GPS example, I think that maybe not all the aspects, but you got to know how to read the map. You got to know like how you should be able to navigate. You should know some stuff if you need to, right? And I do think that there are like, it's a good opportunity for us to think about what are the things that we still need to know, and what are the things that maybe we don't need to focus as much on, say in schools. Like we deal with curriculum all the time, and I've had some discussions with Tara Linney, who did code equity, and one of her messages was that learning coding isn't just this like thing. Oh, maybe you like it's a good thing to learn. It's like if you want to have equity, over half of Gen Zs these days are working on freelance platforms such as Fiverr or Upwork. And what does it mean when your boss is no longer a human? It's actually mitigated by an artificial intelligence. We need to think about that differently. And your knowledge of AI and your knowledge of like some basics of how computers work is really going to determine whether or not you will thrive or you will be subjected to this system. And so I do think there's good ways for people to fight back, but I do think like preparing our kids for the future is going to look different than when our parents did. And I often like say like we're a judgment-free community because a lot of people don't know this stuff right off the bat, and that's okay, right? Nobody could have told you like, oh, our society should change this much.
Yeah.
But I do think like beyond the technology, we got to look at the society and how much the technology impacts society. We often just consider the technology, but we don't consider like the society implications. But it's the society implications that are really interesting. Like in the 1960s, the Jetsons, had all this futuristic technology. It was incredible. But they still believed that, wives would still stay at home. They wouldn't be working. So they didn't think about the society changes that would result from a lot of this technology. And I think that that's the part to me that's really interesting, is that technology is not just technology. Technology is part of an evolving society. And in the same way, like with privacy is not just privacy on your data. This is like your rights. How could you, like, if people know, more about you, they have more control over your actions. They have more control over your political decisions. And I think that if you wanted to gain back control, there is some need, like you said, like to know the map, know how to read the map, know what's really going on underneath. Otherwise, you're just going to be guided to wherever they decide to tell you to go.
You're brilliant. So this is a fun conversation to have with you. I love the Justice analogy. Yeah, the fact that she was a Judy, is that her name? She was a
Yeah, that's right.
housewife. Yeah, so
Exactly.
I guess Judy now in the future is Surrey, right? Surrey is like this 50s housewife that does everything you ask her to.
Actually, that's the thing that's kind of interesting is we used to think of the we used to think of some of the low skill jobs as maybe working in like fast food, for example, maybe being a cook. But in the future, potentially everything that can be done on Fiverr or Upwork will become those low skill jobs. And that can include things like programming, and it can include things like writing or doing graphic design. And this is the thing that's really frightening. So that's why I feel it's more and more important to move towards the creativity side, because those are the things that are really hard for AI to do. And it's really unique to you. So you will have your own style, and it'll be you, nobody else will be able to copy it. And so you're investing in creativity, you're investing in your future. So yeah, I like it.
Wow. Well, so this topic is fascinating to me about parenting and AI, about, how parents need to think about algorithms and the things that their children um, are exposed to. Tell me, we just need to get into this a bit. So tell me what are the things that people aren't thinking about, or what are questions that they're not asking that you wish they'd be asking right now?
So that's a great question. In terms of for parents and what they're thinking, there is a lot of anxiety around like the amount of time that they're spending in front of screens. And I think they're not being entirely clear like how systems like YouTube are recommending different videos for their children and how all of this works. And I feel that one of the things that they could ask that they aren't asking right now is about what's happening underneath, right? Well, how do I get these recommendations? Why do we see certain things? I can't remember how many parents I speak to that they're like, I hate Kalu, or I hate Blippi, or I hate like certain types of channels. Why does Peppa, appear at the top? And I think one of the things that people don't realize is there's kind of an unconscious system here. I describe AI as this thing where AI is creepy, right? Like the stuff that it knows about people and the stuff that it can enact on. And what happens every time people become aware of the AI is that, there's a lot of like public outrage. And then as a result, AI has to go more and more underground. It has to become more hidden. The example was like you've heard of the story of Target Dad, right? Like he discovered that his daughter was pregnant, even though he didn't know that himself. So he was more aware of what was happening in his family than he was. And in response to that, Target didn't stop. Like the key message here is they didn't stop. They stopped the creepiness, but they didn't stop the creeping. And this is very common. Like history repeats itself. That's exactly what's happening right now. Like we are moving from the era of, full-on cookie tracking with your email on it to a slightly more anonymous version. They are not stopped. There is no stopping of the tracking that they are doing on you. What they are doing is they're stopping the creepiness, but not the creeping in this case. Because what they did is they just took for example, in Target, the solution was pretty simple. It was just, you take that and you throw in a couple other random ads. So there's the super targeted one and you put some other ones and people are none the wiser about what is going on. In the same way, we throw in a bunch of ads now into your feed. It looks like a regular post and some of them are going to be way off, and that's on purpose, right? Because everyone was super well targeted. You'd be like, this AI is so good. It knows so much about me. And in the same way, like as you're probably already aware, like there's all those different phases that we're moving to in the privacy space, right? Like from a straight like ID cookie tracking to like a session ID or like a mixed panel type style to a flock type style, like a federated learning style. And in each one of these phases, yes, it becomes technically more anonymous. But what it also means is that you have less rights to this data because it's not you, technically. And you have less ability for any recourse. If a decision is made by AI, first of all, it's not you, it's an objective decision. Like these systems have huge bias built into them. I think many people have already talked about the types of bias in AI and your ability to fight back against that, to say your decision, the AI decision is not correct. There's no recourse. There's less and less recourse, especially when you don't control or have any access to that data. And so to me, that's the growing trend that I see in the privacy space of, yes, it's going to be more anonymous, but that also comes with some consequences in terms of your ability to correct that information and your rights to that information.
Right. So the more anonymous it becomes, the less transparent it is as well. So, right. Because once they anonymize it, they don't really have to tell you anything about that data. But, just like I know people are thinking about Flock with Google and things like that. To me, a credit score is a Flock as far as I'm concerned, because basically, even though you give, like, let's say you want to buy a car or a house, you give them your information, they're doing risk modeling on you based on other information that they have from other people or other systems. You know what I'm saying? So they're judging you not just on yourself, but then they're also rating you on kind of these other anonymized people. So to me, that's what Flock is. So it's not a new thing, in my opinion.
Yeah. I think the other aspect when it comes to like buried underground, like a Flock is certainly one of them, but think of it like we're moving from conscious like input, which used to be like the likes, comments, shares, to very much unconscious input, like both Facebook and YouTube focus a lot on watch time, and we don't like our if we scroll. I think Facebook VP in EMEA said that we scroll the equivalent of a Statue of Liberty worth of posts every single day, and your milliseconds of watch time for each one of those posts tells an enormous amount about what is interesting to you. And when we live in a world where all of that information, those milliseconds of watch time, is tracked, we can gain a very detailed profile without you having clicked on anything in particular. And I think that people aren't realizing that it's one of the reasons why we are getting much more aggressive posts. Before I was talking about Peppa. Peppa is very cruel to her brother. And what we've learned in this time is that these types of aggressive things attract the really young mind more. So they'll actually sit there and they'll watch it longer. In the same way, Caillou is the same. He is very mean to his siblings. And this cruelty towards others, it turns out, like when you think about unconscious input, like those milliseconds of watch time, it's not our conscious mind. Like it's not even like our like forebrains that are controlling that time, how much time we spend on it. It's very subconscious. And so now we're back to the fundamentals of like sex and aggression, right?
Yeah.
So those two people are spending more time on things that are more aggressive. We know this, and so do like most media, and that's why there's so much focus on things that are more aggressive. You go to Twitter, like there's a lot of anger, because anger means longer watch time, and anger means more ads shown, and that's what they optimize for. They say they optimize for what people want, but what they're saying is actually we optimize for what people's subconscious wants, not necessarily what they would say that they want. And those are two different things.
You have pointed to Caillou and Pippa. I want to make sure people know who they are, just in
Yeah,
case
they're
the
two
audience doesn't know who they
cartoons
are.
that some kids watch. That one has an animated pig who's a Peppa is an animated pig who has a sibling, and there is Caillou who it's a cartoon as well. So they're just two cartoons you can watch on YouTube.
Cool. Okay, that makes sense. I don't know. I guess in retrospect, I was very fortunate that my parents were very strict on us growing up about kind of the things that we watched and sort of our influences. So, I grew up in a house where we had one TV, so everyone had to watch, one TV in a common area. So we all had to sort of share that. And then our parents limited our TV watching severely. So we didn't watch a lot of TV. And I think that's one reason why I don't watch a lot of TV now, because I just had that experience growing up. But
Yeah.
if I think back to growing up, if we had YouTube and cell phones, I would imagine that would be maddening, because there's so many other ways that, uh, you know, the outside can get in, to influence your kid, right? So for us, it was like the Sears catalog would come and had all the toys in it, and we try to tell our parents about where we wanted, or maybe there'd be a commercial in a cartoon or something like that. But I felt like that was at least manageable, for parents. But I can't imagine what parents go through right now with, TV, with tablets, everything that you could think of is trying to sell someone something, try to gather some information from you. What are your thoughts?
So I love what you said, and I think it's not just yourself. I think many parents these days are in exactly the same boat. When they grew up, everything was like they didn't have that much technology, so technology was in a public space, right? And so what you did was very closely monitored, and I think that was a really good benefit. And for many parents these days, it like we grew up without that technology, and so now what you see like happening online seems so wrong. But if you think about like from our kids' generation, they've known nothing but this, and so it doesn't seem wrong to them. And I think that that's one of the things that's causing a big divide between parents and their kids, is that the kids will say like, oh, my parents just totally don't understand what we're going through. And I think having some understanding of what is different, like what's the difference between YouTube just showing you a bunch of videos versus the TV? Well, when somebody was selecting the programming for TV, that was like a person. And there were very specific rules, like there were laws on what that person could show you versus not show you. And a lot of those rules do not apply in the AI world of, oh, I'm just going to recommend something to that individual. And so you will see stuff. And it's one of the reasons why we had ElsaGate. It's one of the reasons why there's certain types of very aggressive types of like Elsa videos. Why would those bubble up to the top? Because like, again, that's a subconscious watch time, but it's not regulated because they have those 501 protections. Like they have certain protections that that reduce safe harbor, that reduces liability for these organizations.
Right, you're right. Because so I'll give you an example of uh, uh, a problem that technology can't really solve, that I think you need a human to solve. And I think that they're actually trying to have AI try to help with this. But many years ago, there became this whole big fad about creating coloring books for adults, right? And so many of those things in the past have been people naturally associated a coloring book with a child's, something that a child would use. So then on the certain channels or certain things that were publicizing these things, they were automatically associating a coloring book with a child. So they were actually advertising adult content to children, because they were coloring books. What are your thoughts about something like that?
I think in terms of guiding parents, like this is one of the key things that we say is like when you're moving from sedation, like just you watch the shows so that I can do other things, to relation. what we're doing is we're showing an interest in their interests. And it's not because, like, the way the analogy I use is playgrounds. It's not that our parents loved playgrounds and they were so excited to go and visit the next playground when we were young, but they would still go and they would still be involved because they wanted to see, well, that's where the friends were. And that's where other people that you could hang out with were. And so they participated in that because they cared about you. And I think in the same way, if the playground is moving from the physical playground to the digital playground, that's about showing an interest in your own kids and saying, yes, those kind of things are interesting to me. And the whole point of this is to build this relationship to the point where you can at least have some prediction of, like, how would they react if they saw something that made them angry online, or what would happen if they saw something mean said about them online. Like, being able to understand that type of reaction is, especially online, it's a very important skill. And so it seems kind of childish, this coloring book that you were speaking about. But if they're into coloring books, you got to get into it, right? Like, I feel if that's what they're driving, like, what could you do to show an interest and maybe guide them to the next step? And that's what they're often looking for. They're at a certain level on Roblox, or they're a certain level in terms of their coloring. They want to improve. How would they learn to improve? You could maybe guide them in that space, and that's a great way to connect. And it doesn't always have to be like on a computer. Like, maybe there's other ways you can do it as well.
I don't envy, parents and what they have to do. I'm not a parent, but I've been an aunt. I have one niece. She's a tinfoil hat person like me, so she won't even comment on anything on social media because, she may watch things, but she won't comment or say anything, which is fine. But you giving some pretty practical tips about what some parents can do. When a kid is out of your, area. So, like, let's say they're at school or they're somewhere else. You can't really control what happens there. But in the educational sense, obviously, you want to be involved with what they're doing. But what about when they're not in school? What about when they're at home? What tips would you think that would help parents, be able to manage this better?
It's interesting. Like, we start off talking a little bit about the digital privacy space, but then there's also the home privacy space as well. And one of the things that I found that kids search for often on Google is, why did my parents take away the door, say, in my bedroom? That's like a general concern for a lot of parents. And it's interesting because, like, you described it as, when we were growing up, we didn't have that privacy on digital devices. We didn't have devices that we could bring to our bedrooms and then use kind of in a very private manner. And now there is a much stronger expectation of privacy from our kids. And so I want them to be, like, as a parent, I do want my kids to have that level of independence. I want them to be thinking that, like, eventually I'm going to have to manage all of this on my own. But the key there is, can we talk about it? Like, can we still be a part of that conversation? And I think that they feel really disconnected right now. Like, it was because of that divide. Like, we grew up in a generation that didn't have these technologies, and now everything seems wrong. But it also could mean that we feel, like, very critical about their interests, even though there's nothing necessarily wrong with, if they really like Peppa, they like, that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? There are lots of things we can talk about that are good things that are covered in it. And so we have to look on the bright side for those things. It's like, but now they're interested. I'm sure our parents were the same way, right? Like, when we started discovering video games or movies or whatever, they're like, look at what they have access to and we didn't have access to. And I think that's normal. I think the key is in the home, the technology, all of these things, like, even the kids at home is kind of like it's not a permanent thing. But the relationship is the thing that lasts the long time. So I spent a lot of time focused on that, because that's the part that's really tough to repair or to change afterwards. And so it's important, like, setting some rules and guidelines that work so that they understand why, not just, like, do it because I say so. Like, there's a reason behind what you're suggesting. And it kind of points back to, wow, I'm doing this because I believe this is going to best prepare you for the future. And yeah, like sometimes I need you to take a break. And sometimes they get really frustrated. And I'm like, you know what? I'm here to help, right? Like I'm here to make it interesting for you. And so a lot of my like time is just taking some stuff from school, for example, and figuring out how can I connect this to their interests. I know that they're really into Star Wars, or they're really into watching Ninjago or something right now. It's like, okay, great. How can I connect what they're doing in school to that? And it was this kind of realization, like I mentioned, that grade 7 French class, where you just start to realize that there are no boring tasks. They're just boring imaginations. And so if you can connect to what they are interested in, they're going to be so much more likely to want to do it intrinsically. And we can't really force anybody to do anything these days. And it's very different, right? We're not in the era where you can just go, okay, I'm going to control what you do online. It's very hard to do that.
Yeah.
And so they will need to have more independence. So how do we make sure that they make the right decisions when they get to that point? Or maybe if they're already beyond that, how do we connect with them enough so that we can be aware of what's going on?
Yeah. The future is about our gaze, right? What our eyeballs touch. Like you said, marketers, they're looking at how long you look at things, and that's telling them things about you, right? You saw I'm sure you saw the documentary, The Social Network.
Mm-hmm.
One thing in that documentary that was concerning for me, obviously, as a tech person, I knew a lot about what they were talking about, and I liked the way that they broke it down to simple levels. But the thing that really stuck out for me, and I think it's something that we can talk about here, which is the psychological manipulation that happens sometimes with this. So there was an example in the documentary where this guy had broke up with this girl, and he was not as interested in interacting or looking at stuff on social media. So they started throwing up updates about this girl that had broke up with him or whatever. And it was like it was very painful reminders, but this was a way for the marketers or whoever to get him to be more engaged with, the content and look at it more. So to me, the issue there is that being able to capture someone's attention for something that they were very hurt by, it may help the marketer, right? But it doesn't help the person, the child, right? So what are your thoughts about that?
You're absolutely right. The people experience trauma in their lifetime. And trauma, I heard from George Valenzuela that it's very much like you have a physical injury, you go to the hospital, you get somebody to help you with it. And it seems like for the emotional trauma that we experience, we kind of think that that's normal and we shouldn't have to go to speak to anybody, but you are actually hurt. You broke up with somebody, you actually do need to talk to someone. And I think that this is the issue, is that the technology can kind of sedate it a little bit. They can point you to other things that kind of feel like they satisfy, but they don't. And none of that actually solves the more core issue. And so it's led to this secondary pandemic of like people's mental health. And it's made things far worse for a lot of people, because they, instead of seeking help, you can just spend more time browsing posts or getting involved with social media. And there isn't anything, there's no rules or legislation besides like, hey, you should go and call these. But definitely we're seeing a major uptick. And I think that the way I've heard it described before is that the mind is this very scary neighborhood. And especially as we are isolating at home, you don't want to go there alone. And more people are alone and they're not speaking to people, but you can still reach out. Like you can still, and that's what we don't do. Like it's all just business meetings, or it's all just like, oh, it's a work thing. And we don't just casually go and say, hey, we're going to have a coffee virtual thing and we're just going to hang out. But we should because our mental health depends on it. We are not meant to struggle, to live, to work, to learn alone. We were meant to do this as a community. We were meant to do this as like families or as groups of friends that are all together. And I think that the more we kind of say, oh, because of this, like I have to isolate. It's like, yeah, you physically are isolating, but you don't need to psychologically isolate. And so this world that we're in is very much one around the mind and around how we know that just subtle like things that we show can have a huge impact on your mood, on pretty much what you buy, like you name it, political decisions. We know that there are huge changes that happen as a result of what people see. And so there's this there's no like content moderation or those types of things, it results in whatever generates more watch time. And this watch time priority among big tech companies is becoming pandemic for a lot of the mental health situation. It may be good for selling people stuff because high anxiety individuals or people who are really stressed out, like they tend to buy things to reduce that stress. But
Right.
it's not really, it's like a patch, but not really a cure
Right.
for the root cause.
So if it was the world according to Dr. Ed, see, what would be your wish for privacy, whether it be something in technology, AI, regulation, anywhere in the world?
So can I ask you a question then about that one, just to
Oh, sure.
clarify? So are you saying like if we could change anything in terms of policy, or if we could change anything in terms of technology, or change anything in terms of like education, like for either
Anything.
parents or those kind of things?
Whatever would be your wish? What would be if you could wave your magic wand, anything that you would want to change that relates to privacy in any realm, what would it be?
We are starting to see a little bit more kind of rights around people's own data, where in some states they are using land terminology in order to describe the people's their data, as you're aware. And I think that increasingly we're starting to realize that this data is more than just, oh yeah, like you liked a few things. This data is very much a profile of your unconscious mind, potentially a better profile than you are aware of, or that your friends are aware of, or even your spouse is aware of, or your closest family members. And we don't have a lot of control as a society when it comes to this data. And I would hope that in the future that this data is something that people are aware is being tracked. They have way more control and way more rights to them. And they start to understand, like, this is how things change. And being able to quickly move, like, from one platform to another, or say, like, hey, you're not allowed to have this data anymore. Because as a consumer of this material, you have no... who described it? It wasn't Timnit. Oh, yes, Meredith Whittaker. She said that concentrated power is being masked as technology innovation. And what this means is that big tech has increasingly more power, potentially more power than some countries, over what we do, how we like, and our careers. And it used to be the case, like when we were growing up, like playing with computers, and that was all optional. It was for fun. We enjoyed doing it. But nowadays it's not. You have no profile online whatsoever, then if somebody's hiring, how would they know what you can do? And I think that we need to start saying like, this is important, and we will not have control of ourselves and our own society without control of this, over this data, right? If something happened a long time ago, we didn't record those things. So we have the advantage that like of all the stuff that we know, that we learned the hard way, but they don't have that. Like our children won't have those unless we fight for those types of rights. And so ideally we live in a society where we have the right to say no to a lot of companies, or say, yes, I said yes before, but now I changed my mind. And that gives control back to us as families, as citizens.
Right. Wow, that's fascinating. Fascinating. Well, thank you so much. This is a really important episode because we had never talked yet about education and parenting and stuff. And I know a lot of people have these challenges, and I'm glad that we were able to talk about it.
Absolutely. I'm glad that we can share this. Do you mind if I mention, like, if people want to learn a little bit more, where they can get some more info?
Go ahead.
We just have a website called aiparenting.live. We do like a weekly live stream. I'm hoping to have Diva on there because she's got some really good insights as well. And really our goal is just to help parents move from screen time to quality time. So there's an insiders mail list. You can go and check it out if you think that that's valuable for your family. And I have other resources as well. I'm planning on doing maybe a summer camp for kids, an AI summer camp, where I want to talk about not just AI, but I want to talk about society. And it'll be like for younger kids, like, people who watch YouTube Kids. It's just like, what is AI? What are some of the basics? Why do you see what you see on YouTube Kids? Why does it make you angry? Those types of things. And so understanding like a little bit about anger and what do we do in that situation. It's as much emotional control as it is AI.
Absolutely.
Because they're connected.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. This is great. And I'm looking forward to being on your show.
Thank you so much, Debbie. Appreciate it.
All right. Bye-bye.